Dawson Rider Wiki.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Rider here with my review of Uchu Sentai Kyuranger episode 11. So this was actually a pretty decent episode. I say that sort of surprised just because usually, at least the last few years after we've gotten 6th Ranger introductions, it's usually kind of a stupid filler afterwards. It's kind of back to stupid business as usual. But this was actually pretty solid. I believe it was last week we introduced the concept of the Argo spaceship thing that we're going to be trying to get, which is like the next goal that they've set now that they've recruited the Kyurangers, which, as I mentioned, is kind of nice to have that in mind, and I appreciate that we picked that up immediately. I don't necessarily expect every episode to be devoted to it. I'd be kind of nicely surprised if it was, but so long as they can keep something like this up, I think it would be really nice. As I've mentioned previously, part of the problem that Ninja and Zyuohger had narratively around this time in the series through the middle was that they introduced a main plot point, but then they would forget it to such an extent and for such a long period of time. It felt like you were watching something like The Simpsons, where it's like, it didn't even really matter if you watched these episodes out of order and they didn't bring it up at all, and it made you feel really weird. In terms of like the narrative, it felt like they just completely forgot stuff. So if we could at least keep whatever their goal is with this and whatever comes next at least partly in mind, I think that would do really good things for the narrative. So I like that we picked it up here right away. Of course, Classic Commander was like, they're like, oh, so this ship's gonna help us defeat him. He's like, I don't know, but hey, at least it's a goal. So I like that we have that going on. This episode was also interesting in like non-plate ways. What am I even saying? Non-main plot ways. You can see how that all just converged into plate. But in terms of, one of the main points was sort of Stinger being apprehensive about Kotaro joining the team. And I like that it was kind of predictable, but I also like that it wasn't oh, he's a kid, he's gonna get hurt. Also, side note, I like how everyone's making a big deal that we have a Kid Ranger. But Tokyuger was literally a team of kids, even though they were adults. But you know how it is. But anyway, but I'm glad that it wasn't that, and it was more like, it was more tying into his personal story of looking up to his brother who had gotten this power and then went crazy and joined the Dark Matter. So he doesn't want to see that happen with Kotaro, especially since he actually has Kyuranger powers now. So I kind of like that bond they have over them both having similar sibling relationships, and like I said, I just like how it was a bit of a different than like apprehension about him joining the team than the usual. And I again wish that this had been echoed into his, I don't know if that's the right word, but I mean, this had been his setup story instead of Lucky being there to be obnoxious. But I like that we touched on that, and it kind of was assumed because since we got information about Kotaro, we know he was going to be sort of like Stinger's partner or friend or whatever, so it just seemed weird to have his intro be all about Lucky. Speaking of Lucky, a couple of different things that are kind of funny is that this episode played with basically his horoscope being that he was going to be unlucky, which is entertaining to see Lucky just basically have bad things happen to him. Like this week was great. You could see Lucky and Poppy losing at battles. It was very cathartic for me, to be honest. But so that was kind of nice just because he's so obnoxious about that, and especially since he says everything he does is lucky. Like, it's different if like you trip and like somehow land on your feet, or you almost drop your phone and catch it and you're like, that was lucky. But he'll just pick up the remote and be like, that's lucky? I just picked up a remote. It's not lucky, you just did something. Or be like, I just sat down. How lucky? Like, that's not, I hate you. But anyway, getting distracted by my hate for Lucky. But so that was kind of an interesting thing, because I'm not sure where they're gonna go with that, whether it's ever just, if it's just a stupid Toku bit, or if there's actually some sort of cosmic reason why he's actually lucky that may or may not be tied into the Kyuranger powers or some other storyline at some point. But he actually was unlucky, and but he still got chosen for the roulette, which I find funny because something I didn't think about is the fact that since we debuted the second mecha of the series, which is the combo of purple, sky blue, and orange, that he doesn't necessarily always have to be picked for the Q-let, because it's kind of a joke, or in a way, that he's always going to be picked for the Q-let thing because he has to be the center of the mecha, and we always have to do a mecha battle because reasons. So I just kind of always assumed that would be a thing. But this episode, I remembered that we're debuting it, and based on the preview, I'm like, oh, we're debuting the new mecha maybe he won't get picked this time, but he still got picked. He just kind of got sidelined, and Kotaro decided to tag along to be obstinate. But it gave me hope that in the future, sometimes the Qlet won't pick him. Since granted, we pick teams of 5, so it'll always leave 2 Voyagers just fighting on their own. But I don't have a problem with that, having Ryutei-oh? I can't remember his name yet. The purple one fighting, and then having 2 other ones helping. Especially if it could be like gold and silver, because they're already like half robots. So I would love to see that in the future. I get a feeling if that ever happens, and we get a team picked that doesn't have Lucky, so we don't use kyuren-oh for that episode, that Lucky will probably be pretty present in the B plot of whatever people are doing on the ship. But it would be nice in the future, considering we actually have other options now to not have him picked. But he was picked in this episode, but it kind of just served to him trying to prove himself as Lucky, and like wouldn't accept that he was unlucky, and he got beaten up. And there actually was kind of an interesting little flashback at the end of him, presumably him as a kid in some sort of ruins, which admittedly piqued my interest. It would be interesting to actually get something interesting about Lucky. I get a feeling no matter how interesting they make whatever this story is, I'll still dislike him based on his personality, but it would be kind of interesting to get something, well, actually interesting about him. I said interesting like 5 times there, but so that piqued my interest. As I said, there was the debut of the new mecha, which was pretty neat. I actually dig it quite a bit. I've gotten used to that like huge antlers bit from the dragon on the mecha, and I think it looks pretty cool. So it was a nice little aesthetically pleasing debut for that. Like I said, I kind of hope it leads to them not being picked later, or Lucky not being picked later, but who knows if that'll happen. And they're still on the goal of trying to get these Qtama gathered to get Argo, and the other assassins have it, so they got to get it back from that. But yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot else left for me to comment on this episode, other than that I thought it was solid. I liked that they continued on a goal. They introduced a potentially interesting, I said interesting again, but interesting plot for Lucky. And there was a pretty decent little story for Kotaro and Stinger there. So I hope they can at least keep somewhat of this momentum. It would be nice. Kyuranger's not blowing me away, but I'm enjoying it decently, so I'm at least mildly looking forward to watching it. And like I said, the biggest thing I'll be watching for is if they can keep a consistent narrative in terms of what they're doing, and not make it feel like all of a sudden after next episode, if they're still looking for Argo, they just drop it for like 15 episodes and never mention it or even look at it. That'll be the test to see if they're gonna follow the same mistakes of their predecessors. But anyway, overall, solid episode. I'd give it a 7.5. Until next time, make sure to check out the Crazy Podcast at writersmanagers.com, and of course, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Till next time, Dawson Ryder, signing out.